The morning sun painted the Montana sky gold as Jack Walker stood on his ranch porch, coffee mug in hand, staring at the empty road that stretched for miles. At 45, he owned one of the biggest cattle ranches in 3 counties, but success had come at a price. His big house felt more like a museum than a home, with rooms he never used and silence that echoed off the walls. Jack's day started the same way it had for months. He heated up leftover pizza for breakfast, stepped over the pile of mail on his kitchen counter, and ignored the dust gathering on furniture his grandmother had once polished with pride. His last housekeeper, Mrs. Rodriguez, had quit 6 months ago after working for him for 3 years. She'd been polite about it, but Jack knew the truth. Living this far from town with only a grumpy rancher for company wasn't exactly anyone's dream job. The ranch hands respected Jack, but they went home to their families every evening. Jack stayed behind in his empty house, eating frozen dinners and watching old Western movies until he fell asleep in his leather chair. He'd built everything he'd ever wanted, but somehow forgot to build a life worth living. That Tuesday morning, Jack finally did something he'd been putting off for weeks. He drove into town and placed an ad in the local newspaper. Housekeeper wanted, live-in position, good pay. Quiet ranch setting. He kept it simple, figuring most people would know what ranch work involved. He expected maybe 3 or 4 responses from women in town looking for steady work. By Thursday, his phone hadn't rung once. Friday came and went without a single call. Jack started to wonder if he'd have to drive all the way to Billings to find help. Maybe living 30 miles from the nearest grocery store was too much for most people. He'd grown up on this land, inherited it from his father, and couldn't imagine living anywhere else. But he was starting to understand why other people might feel differently. Saturday morning changed everything. Jack was checking on his horses when he heard a truck engine struggling up his long driveway. He looked up to see an old pickup truck pulling a small horse trailer, both covered in road dust and showing their age. The truck had license plates from Oklahoma, and steam was rising from under the hood. The driver parked near his gate and stepped out slowly, like someone who'd been driving for a long time. She was a woman in her late 20s with sun-streaked brown hair tied back in a practical ponytail. Her jeans and boots were worn but clean, and she moved with the careful grace of someone who'd spent years around horses. She walked to the back of the trailer and spoke softly to whatever was inside. Jack watched from a distance as she let out a beautiful bay Marais. The horse was well cared for despite the obvious signs of travel. The woman checked the horse's legs and gave her some water from a bucket she'd filled at Jack's outdoor spigot. Only then did she walk toward the house, a folded newspaper in her hand. "Excuse me," she called out when she saw Jack. "I'm here about the housekeeper job. I know I should have called first, but my phone ran out of minutes yesterday." Jack walked over, surprised. This wasn't what he'd expected at all. The woman was young, traveled with a horse, and looked like she hadn't slept in a real bed for weeks. Her truck was packed with everything she owned, which wasn't much. A few suitcases, some horse equipment, and a sleeping bag visible through the back window. "I'm Beth," she said, extending her hand. "Beth Collins. I saw your ad in the paper." Jack Walker," he replied, shaking her hand. Her grip was firm, calloused from hard work. "You came all the way from Oklahoma?" "Been traveling for a while," Beth said, not offering details. "Looking for work where I can keep my horse. Duchess here is all the family I've got left." Jack looked at the Marais, who was watching them with intelligent eyes. "She's beautiful. How long have you had her?" 8 years, since she was a foal. I trained her myself." Beth's voice softened when she talked about her horse. "She's gentle but smart. Won't cause any trouble." Something in Beth's tone made Jack curious, but he didn't press. He could see she was tired and her truck was making concerning noises as the engine cooled. "You drove straight through, pretty much?" "Been living on the road for a while now, picking up work where I can find it. Saw your ad and thought maybe it was time to settle down somewhere, at least for a while." Jack studied her face. She had the kind of weathered look that came from real hardship, not just hard work. Her clothes were clean but faded, and he noticed. She kept glancing back at her horse like she was afraid something might happen to her. "The job's live in," Jack said. There's a small apartment above the garage. Nothing fancy, but it's got a kitchen and bathroom, heat and electricity included. That sounds perfect, Beth said quickly. What about Duchess? I can pay for her feed and care. Got plenty of pasture and a good barn? She can stay with my horses. Jack paused. You know anything about ranch work? It's not just housekeeping out here. Beth's face brightened for the first time. Grew up on a farm. Can handle most anything that needs doing. I'm good with horses, know my way around cattle, and I can fix things that break. Plus, I actually enjoy cooking and cleaning when I'm not living out of a truck. Jack found himself believing her. There was something honest about the way she spoke, like she was too tired to pretend to be anything other than what she was. What kind of work have you been doing? Whatever I could find. Helped with harvests, worked at a few stables, cleaned houses in town sometimes. Nothing steady, though. Hard to find work when you've got a horse and no permanent address. The morning. Sun was getting stronger, and Jack could see Beth was getting warm in her jacket. Her truck was still ticking as it cooled down, and he noticed the inspection sticker was expired. This woman needed help, but more than that, she seemed genuine in a way that was hard to fake. Tell you what, Jack said. Why don't you put your horse in the pasture and come inside for some coffee? We can talk about the job properly. Beth's relief was obvious. Thank you. I really appreciate this. As they walked toward the house, Duchess following behind on a lead rope, Jack felt something he hadn't experienced in months. His house might actually have life in it again. He'd been looking for a housekeeper, but maybe he'd found something more important. Maybe he'd found someone who understood what it meant to be far from home and looking for a place to belong. Beth looked around at the ranch buildings, the wide pastures and the mountains in the distance. This is beautiful, she said softly. Like something out of a dream, Jack smiled for the first time in weeks. Sometimes dreams are closer than we think. The first week at the ranch felt like walking on eggshells for both Jack and Beth. She moved into the small apartment above the garage, which was actually nicer than anywhere she'd stayed in months. It had a tiny kitchen, a comfortable bed, and, best of all, a real shower with hot water that didn't run out after 5 minutes. Beth woke up before sunrise every morning, a habit she'd developed from years of farm life. She'd check on Duchess first, who had settled into the pasture like she'd been there forever. The other horses seemed to accept her easily, and Jack's old gelding, Thunder, had even become protective of the new arrival. After caring for her horse, Beth would slip quietly into the main house and start her work. Jack's kitchen was a disaster zone of takeout containers and frozen food boxes. The living room looked like it hadn't been properly cleaned in months, and his office was buried under piles of papers and ranch documents that needed organizing. Beth worked methodically, room by room. She didn't just clean, she organized. She found important documents scattered everywhere and created a simple filing system. She threw out expired food and restocked the pantry with basics. She even fixed a wobbly kitchen table leg that had been bothering Jack for weeks. Jack watched her work from a distance, curious about his new employee. Beth moved through the house like she understood ranch life instinctively. When she found a broken window latch, she fixed it without asking. When she noticed the coffee maker was about to die, she cleaned it so thoroughly it worked like new again. What impressed Jack most was how Beth handled herself around the ranch. On her third day, she was hanging laundry when she noticed one of the fence gates had come loose. Instead of mentioning it to Jack, she found tools in the barn and fixed it herself. She did it right, too, using the proper technique that would make the repair last. Tommy, Jack's youngest ranch hand, was struggling with a sick calf that afternoon. Beth appeared at the barn just as Tommy was getting frustrated. She took one look at the calf and gently suggested it might be dehydrated rather than truly sick. She mixed up an electrolyte solution and showed Tommy how to get the calf to drink it. Within an hour, the little animal was standing steady and looking much better. Where'd you learn that? Tommy asked, impressed. My dad raised cattle back home. Beth said simply, You pick things up when you grow up around animals? Jack overheard this conversation and found himself wondering about Beth's story. She clearly came from farming people, but something had happened to change her circumstances. He was curious, but Beth kept her personal life private, and Jack respected that. The biggest change in the house was the food. Beth cooked real meals from scratch, the kind Jack remembered from his childhood. Pot roast with vegetables, homemade. Bread, chicken, and dumplings that actually tasted like his grandmother's recipe. She'd leave a plate warming in the oven for him, along with a note about what time dinner was ready. At first, Jack ate alone as usual, but gradually he started timing his return to the house to coincide with Beth's cooking. He'd find excuses to be in the kitchen when she was preparing meals. Drawn by the warm smells and the sound of someone actually living in his house, Beth noticed Jack's loneliness in small ways. How he'd linger in the kitchen, clearly wanting to talk but not knowing how to start a conversation. How he'd eat his meals standing at the counter instead of sitting at the table. How he'd turn the television up loud in the evenings, probably just to have some noise in the empty house. One evening, while Beth was making cornbread, Jack came in from checking on a pregnant Mare. He looked tired and worried. "Everything okay with Rosie?" Beth asked, not looking up from mixing the batter. "She's getting close, but something doesn't feel right. Might be a difficult birth." Jack washed his hands at the kitchen sink. "I've called the vet, but he's dealing with an emergency 2 counties over." Beth set down her spoon. "Mind if I take a look? I've helped with a few difficult births back home." Jack was surprised. "You know about that?" "My family bred horses for 15 years. I've seen just about everything that can go wrong during foaling." Beth wiped her hands on her apron. "Might be nothing, but an extra pair of eyes never hurts." They walked to the barn together, and Beth examined the Mare with gentle, experienced hands. Rosie was clearly in distress, but Beth's calm presence seemed to settle her. "She's carrying the foal wrong," Beth said quietly. "Baby's trying to come out sideways. We need to turn it before the contractions get too strong." Jack had assisted with difficult births before, but he'd never seen anyone work as calmly and efficiently as Beth. She talked softly to the Mare while carefully repositioning the foal, and within 20 minutes a healthy filly was born. "You saved them both," Jack said, watching the newborn struggle to stand. "That could have gone very badly." "Rosie did all the hard work," Beth said, but she was smiling. "I just helped a little." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the Mare clean her baby. It was the first time Jack had felt truly at ease with another person in years. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Really, just glad I could help." Beth looked at the new filly with obvious joy. There's nothing quite like watching a new life come into the world. The crisis had broken down some invisible barrier between them. As they walked back to the house, Jack found himself talking more freely than he had in months. "I used to help my dad with the horses when I was young," he said. "Haven't done a birth like that in years? You made it look easy." "Nothing about?" "Ranch life is easy," Beth replied, "but it's honest work. Animals don't lie to you or pretend to be something they're not." Jack glanced at her, hearing something deeper in her words. "Sounds like you've known people who do." Beth was quiet for a moment. "Haven't we all?" That night, they shared dinner at the kitchen table for the first time. Beth had made beef stew and fresh rolls, and the conversation flowed naturally. Jack talked about his plans for the ranch, his hopes of maybe expanding into sustainable farming practices. Beth listened carefully and asked intelligent questions. "You know," she said, cutting her roll, "there's a section of land behind the barn that would be perfect for a vegetable garden. Soil looks good, gets plenty of sun, and it's close to the water source." "You think so?" Jack hadn't considered growing vegetables on any serious scale. "Could start small. Just enough for the house at first, maybe sell some extras at the farmer's market in town. Good vegetables are hard to find around here, especially organic ones." Jack found himself genuinely interested in the idea. "You know about organic farming?" "Some?" "My family tried to transition to organic practices before." Beth paused, then continued. "Before things changed. It's more work, but better for the land in the long run." Again, Jack sensed there was more to Beth's story, but he didn't push. Whatever had brought her to his ranch, she was here now, And that was enough. As the evening wound down, Jack realized he'd spent more time in genuine conversation than he had in months. Beth had brought more than just clean rooms and good food to his house. She'd brought life back to a place that had been slowly dying of loneliness. "Beth," he said as she started clearing the dishes. "Thank you for today, all of it." She smiled, and for the first time since she'd arrived, it reached her eyes. "Thank you for giving me a chance. Both of us," she added, glancing toward the barn, where Duchess was settled for the night. "Both of you belong here," Jack said, and meant it completely. Spring turned into summer, and the ranch fell into a comfortable rhythm. Beth had been there for 3 months now, and Jack couldn't imagine his life without her steady presence. She'd transformed his house from a lonely bachelor pad into something that actually felt like a home. The vegetable garden Beth had suggested was thriving. What started as a small plot behind the barn had grown into neat rows of tomatoes, peppers, corn, and herbs. Beth worked in the garden every morning after her ranch duties, and Jack found himself joining her more and more often. There was something peaceful about working the soil together, planning what to plant next and watching things grow. "My grandmother would have loved this," Jack said one morning, helping Beth tie up tomato plants. "She always said a ranch wasn't complete without a good garden." "Smart woman," Beth replied, brushing dirt off her hands. "My mom used to say the same thing. Said it kept you connected to the land in a different way than just raising cattle." Jack noticed how Beth talked about her family in the past tense, but he'd learned not to push for details. Whatever had happened in her previous life, it was clear she wasn't ready to share it yet. Their friendship had deepened over the weeks. They ate dinner together most evenings now, talking about everything from ranch business to books they'd read. Jack discovered that Beth was well educated despite her current circumstances. She knew about literature, history, and farming techniques. That impressed even his longtime ranch hands. "You ever think about going back to school?" Jack asked one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "You've got a good head for business. Could probably get a degree in agriculture or ranch management." Beth was quiet for a long moment. "I actually had a degree once in agricultural science. Seems like a lifetime ago now." "What happened?" Jack asked gently. "Life got complicated," Beth said simply. "Sometimes you have to choose between your dreams and your survival." Jack wanted to ask more, but he could see the conversation was making Beth uncomfortable. He'd learned to recognize the signs when she was remembering something painful. They're peaceful. Routine was shattered on a hot Tuesday in July. Jack was in town getting supplies when a beat-up sedan pulled into the ranch driveway. Beth was hanging laundry when she heard the car door slam, and her blood ran cold when she saw who got out. Ray Collins, her ex-husband. The man she'd been running from for almost a year. Ray looked exactly the same as when she'd left him. Tall, lean, with the kind of smile that fooled most people into thinking he was charming. But Beth knew the anger that lived behind those eyes, the way his voice could turn cold and threatening in seconds. Well, Ray said, walking toward her with false confidence. "Found you at last, Beth. You led me on quite a chase. What do you want, Ray?" Beth's voice was steady, but her hands shook as she gripped the laundry basket. "What's mine?" Ray said simply. "You took off with my horse and my truck, remember? Left me with nothing but bills and a mess to clean up. The divorce papers say otherwise," Beth replied. "Duchess was mine before we married, and the truck was payment for my half of the farm." Ray laughed, but there was no humor in it. That judge didn't know what he was talking about. "You know as well as I do that you owe me." Beth backed toward the house, but Ray stepped closer. "Don't even think about running again. I've got friends in every state between here and Oklahoma. You can't hide forever." "I'm not hiding," Beth said, trying to keep her voice calm. "I'm working. I have a job here, playing house with some rich cowboy." Ray's eyes took in the ranch buildings, the nice house, the well-maintained property. "Found yourself a sugar daddy, did you?" "Always knew you were smart." "It's not like that," Beth said firmly. "I work for my living." "Sure you do," Ray sneered. "Look, I'm not here to cause trouble. I just want what's mine. The horse and the money you cost me when you left." $15,000 should cover it. Beth's heart sank. Ray had always been good at making his problems other people's responsibility. I don't have $15,000. Then I guess we have a problem, Ray said, his voice turning cold. Because I'm not leaving without it. At that moment, Duchess whinnied from the pasture. Ray's head turned toward the sound, and his expression changed to one of greedy calculation. That's a nice piece of property your horse is on, he said thoughtfully. Pretty valuable mare, too. Bet I could get good money for her. You can't take her, Beth said desperately. She's mine. The divorce papers prove it. Divorce papers can be challenged, Ray said with a cruel smile. Especially when one party leaves the state without proper notice. Might be interested to know that you never updated your address with the court. Beth felt trapped. She'd been so focused on just surviving that she'd ignored some of the legal requirements after the divorce. Ray had always been good at finding loopholes and using them against people. I'll give you 1 week, Ray said, walking back toward his car. Find the money, or I'll take the horse and sue you for the rest. And don't think about running again. I know where you are now. He drove away, leaving Beth standing in the yard feeling like her world was falling apart. She'd been so happy here, so settled. For the first time in years, she'd felt safe. Now, that safety was gone, and she was right back where she'd started. When Jack returned from town an hour later, he found Beth packing her belongings in the apartment above the garage. Her face was pale, and her hands were shaking. Beth, what's wrong? Jack climbed the stairs 2 at a time. I have to leave, Beth said without looking at him. I'm sorry, Jack, I really am. But I can't stay here anymore. Why? What happened? Beth finally looked at him, and Jack saw fear in her eyes that he'd never seen before. My ex-husband found me. He's demanding money I don't have, and he's threatening to take Duchess. Your ex-husband? Jack's voice was sharp. What kind of man threatens a woman over money? The kind I was married to, Beth said quietly. Ray's. Not a good person, Jack. He's got a temper, and he doesn't give up easily. I can't let him bring trouble here. You've been too good to me. Jack watched Beth fold her clothes with quick, practiced movements. This wasn't the first time she'd had to pack up and leave quickly. How long has he been following you? Jack asked. Since I left him, almost a year now. Beth's voice was barely above a whisper. He says I owe him money from the divorce, but really he just can't stand that I got away from him. And you've been running this whole time? What choice did I have? Ray has friends everywhere. People who owe him favors. He's good at making life difficult for people who cross him. Jack felt anger building in his chest. Not at Beth, but at the man who had driven her to this point. You don't have to run anymore. Yes, I do, Beth said, zipping up her suitcase. He said he'd be back in a week. I need to be gone before then. Like hell you do, Jack said firmly. This is your home now. Nobody's going to drive you away from it. Beth looked at him with a mixture of hope and fear. You don't understand? Ray's not just going to give up and leave. He'll make trouble for you too. Let him try, Jack said. I've been dealing with troublemakers longer than you think. And I've got something Ray doesn't. What's that? Legal ownership of this land, and friends will back me up. Jack's voice was steady and confident. Stay, Beth. Let me help you. Fight this. For the first time since Ray's visit, Beth felt a spark of hope. Maybe she didn't have to run anymore. Maybe she'd finally found someone willing to stand with her instead of against her. Jack spent the entire night convincing Beth to stay. They sat at his kitchen table until dawn, talking through her options while she wrestled with fear and hope. By morning, Beth had agreed to let Jack help her fight Ray's threats, though she was still terrified of what might happen. First thing we need to do is talk to my lawyer, Jack said over breakfast. Tom Rodriguez has handled my ranch business for 10 years. He's good at dealing with bullies. What if Ray's right about the divorce papers? Beth asked, pushing eggs around her plate. What if I did something wrong when I left Oklahoma? And then we'll fix it, Jack said firmly. But I bet Ray's just trying to scare you. Men like him usually are. That afternoon, they drove to town together. Beth had barely slept, jumping at every sound outside her window. She kept looking over her shoulder. expecting to see Ray's car following them. Tom Rodriguez was a kind man in his 50s who'd known Jack since they were kids. He listened carefully as Beth explained her situation, taking notes and asking gentle questions about her marriage and divorce. "Ray sounds like a classic abuser," Tom said after hearing the whole story. "They often use legal threats to control their victims, even after the relationship ends." "So he can't really take Duchess?" Beth asked hopefully. "Not based on what you've told me. The horse was yours before marriage, and the divorce decree clearly states that. As for the money he's demanding, that's just intimidation." Tom leaned back in his chair. "However, we should file a restraining order. His behavior constitutes harassment." "Will that actually stop him?" Beth asked. "It gives us legal protection if he violates it. And it creates a paper trail if things escalate." Tom pulled out some forms. "I'll need you to write down everything he said, exactly as you remember it." Writing down Ray's threats was harder than Beth expected. Seeing his words on paper made them feel real again, brought back memories of other times he'd intimidated her. Jack sat beside her, offering quiet support as she worked through the painful process. "There's something else," Tom said when Beth finished. "You mentioned Ray has friends who help him track you. That could be considered stalking, which is a serious crime." "I never thought of it that way," Beth said quietly. "I just thought of it as Ray being Ray." "Abuse isn't normal, Beth. What he's doing to you isn't okay." Tom's voice was gentle but firm. "You deserve to live without fear." The next few days were tense. Beth threw herself into ranch work, trying to stay busy while they waited for the restraining order to be processed. Jack made sure she was never alone, either working alongside her or having one of his ranch hands nearby. Tommy, the young ranch hand, had figured out something was wrong. "Beth seems scared," he told Jack one afternoon. "She keeps looking over her shoulder like she's expecting trouble." "She might be," Jack said carefully. "Keep an eye out for strangers on the property. Anyone who doesn't belong here. You got it, boss. Beth's good people. We'll look out for her." Jack realized his whole crew had grown fond of Beth over the months. She'd helped all of them at one point or another, and they respected her knowledge and work ethic. If Ray showed up looking for trouble, he'd find more than he bargained for. The restraining order was approved on Friday. Tom called with the good news, and for the first time in a week, Beth smiled genuinely. "So he can't come near me now?" she asked. "Not legally." "If he does, we can have him arrested." Tom's voice was satisfied. "I also did some research on your ex-husband. He's got a record of harassment complaints from other women. This isn't his first time using intimidation tactics." Beth felt a mixture of relief and sadness. Relief that she wasn't Ray's only victim, but sadness for the other women he'd hurt. "What happens now?" "Now you get to live your life," Jack said, squeezing her hand. "No more running, no more looking over your shoulder." Unfortunately, Ray didn't get the message. He showed up at the ranch the following Tuesday, angrier than before. This time, he brought 2 friends with him, both looking like they'd spent time in jail. Was in the vegetable garden when she heard the car doors slam. Her heart sank when she saw Ray walking toward her with his companions flanking him like bodyguards. "Time's up, Beth," Ray called out. "You got my money?" "I got your restraining order," Beth replied, standing straighter. "You're not supposed to be here," Ray laughed. "Piece of paper doesn't scare me." "Neither does your boyfriend. Where is he anyway?" "Right here," Jack said, stepping out from behind the barn. Tommy and 2 other ranch hands were with him, all carrying tools that could serve as weapons if needed. Ray's confidence faltered slightly when he saw he was outnumbered. "This is between me and my wife," he said. "Ex-wife," Jack corrected, "and she's under my protection now." "Protection?" Ray sneered. "From what?" "I'm just trying to collect what's owed to me." "You're violating a restraining order," Jack said calmly. "Which means you're breaking the law." "I don't see any cops around," one of Ray's friends said with a nasty grin. "That's because they're on their way," Jack replied. "I called them the minute I saw your car." As if on cue, a sheriff's deputy's car came up the driveway, followed by Tom Rodriguez's pickup truck. Ray's face went pale as he realized he'd walked into a trap. Deputy Martinez was Jack's cousin, and he'd been briefed on the situation. "Ray Collins?" he asked, getting out of his patrol car. "That's me," Ray said, trying to sound casual. "You're under arrest for violating a restraining order," Deputy Martinez said, pulling out his handcuffs. "You have the right to remain silent." Ray's friends backed away quickly, not wanting to be involved in an arrest. Ray himself looked stunned, like he couldn't believe his intimidation tactics had backfired. "This isn't over, Beth," Ray said as the deputy cuffed him. "I'll be back." "No, you won't," Deputy Martinez said firmly. "Violating a restraining order is a serious offense. You'll be lucky if you don't spend the next 6 months in jail." As Ray was led away, Beth felt something she hadn't experienced in over a year: true safety. For the first time since leaving Oklahoma, she wasn't afraid. "Is it really over?" she asked Jack as they watched the patrol car disappear down the road. "It's over," Jack said, putting his arm around her shoulders. "Ray's going to jail, and when he gets out, he'll know better than to come back here." That evening, the ranch hands threw an impromptu celebration. Nothing fancy, just barbecue and beer around the fire pit behind the barn. Beth sat with Jack, watching the flames dance and listening to the men tell stories about their own encounters with troublemakers. "Thank you," Beth said quietly to Jack. "For everything. For believing in me, for helping me fight instead of run." "You don't need to thank me," Jack replied. "This is what people do for each other. This is what family does." Beth looked at him with surprise. "Family? That's what we are, isn't it?" Jack smiled. "You, me, this ranch, even the horses, we're all family here." For the first time in years, Beth felt like she truly belonged somewhere. She'd found more than just a job and a place to live. She'd found a home and people who cared enough to fight. For her, the fire crackled, the stars came out, and Beth finally felt free. With Ray finally out of the picture, Beth began to truly heal for the first time in years. The constant fear that had followed her for months slowly melted away, replaced by something she'd almost forgotten how to feel: genuine happiness. Autumn came early to Montana that year, painting the ranch in brilliant shades of gold and red. Beth threw herself into ranch life with renewed energy, no longer looking over her shoulder or planning escape routes. She enrolled in online courses to finish her agricultural science degree, something she'd abandoned during her troubled marriage. Jack supported her education completely, often finding her at the kitchen table in the evenings, surrounded by textbooks and laptops. "You sure you want to take on so much?" he'd ask, bringing her coffee and homemade cookies. "I have 4 years to make up for," Beth would reply with determination. "Besides, what I'm learning can help the ranch. Did you know there are new sustainable farming techniques that could increase our profits by 30%? Jack loved seeing this side of Beth, the confident woman who'd been hidden under years of fear and self-doubt. Her intelligence shone through in everything she did, from organizing the ranch's financial records to suggesting improvements that saved both time and money. The vegetable garden that started as a small hobby had grown into something special. Beth's organic vegetables were so good that the local restaurant in town started buying everything she could grow. Word spread quickly, and soon she had a waiting list of customers wanting her tomatoes, peppers, and herbs. "You could start your own business," Jack suggested one morning as they loaded crates of vegetables for delivery. "Beth's Organic Gardens has a nice ring to it." "I like working with you too much to go off on my own," Beth replied, but Jack could see she was pleased by the idea. "Maybe we could expand together. Turn part of the ranch into a certified organic farm." The idea excited Jack more than he expected. He'd been looking for ways to diversify the ranch, and organic farming was a growing market. More than that, he loved the thought of building something with Beth, creating a legacy they could share. As the months passed, their partnership deepened in ways neither of them had anticipated. What started as employer and employee had become genuine friendship, then something deeper that neither wanted to name yet. Jack found himself looking forward to their morning coffee conversations more than anything else in his day. Beth had a way of making even mundane ranch business feel important and interesting. She listened to his ideas about expanding the operation and offered suggestions that were always practical and smart. Beth, for her part, had fallen in love with more than just the ranch. She loved the way Jack treated his animals with genuine care, how he was respected by his workers without being harsh or demanding. She loved his dry sense of humor and the way his face lit up when he talked about his dreams for the future. The turning point came during the ranch's annual harvest celebration. It was a tradition Jack had started years ago, inviting neighboring ranchers and townspeople to celebrate the end of another successful season. This year felt different, though. This year, it felt like a real celebration instead of just an obligation. Beth had spent weeks preparing, cooking enough food to feed an army and decorating the barn with autumn flowers and lights. She wore a blue dress that Jack had never seen before, and she looked more beautiful than he'd ever imagined possible. "You clean up pretty nice for a ranch hand," Jack teased as they stood together watching their guests enjoy the party. "You don't look too bad yourself, Cowboy," Beth replied. Admiring Jack in his best shirt and boots, the local band started playing, and couples began dancing on the makeshift dance floor Tommy had set up in the barn. Jack watched for a while, then worked up the courage to do something he'd been thinking about for weeks. "Dance with me?" he asked, extending his hand to Beth. "I thought you'd never ask," she replied with a smile that made Jack's heart skip. They moved together easily as if they'd been dancing together for years. Jack wasn't much of a dancer, but with Beth in his arms, it felt natural and right. The music seemed to fade into the background as they swayed together under the twinkling lights. "Beth," Jack said softly, "there's something I need to tell you." "What's that?" she asked, looking up into his eyes. "I love you," Jack said simply. "I've been falling in love with you since the day you showed up here with that horse of yours, but I was too scared to say anything." Beth's breath caught in her throat. She'd been hoping to hear those words for months, but hadn't dared to believe they were possible. "I love you too," she whispered. "I think I have since you helped me save Rosie's foal." They stopped dancing, just holding each other in the middle of the barn while the party continued around them. For both of them, it felt like coming home in a way they'd never experienced before. "What happens now?" Beth asked. "Now we build something together," Jack replied. "A real life, a real future. If you want that." "I want that more than anything," Beth said, and Jack leaned down to kiss her for the first time. The next year passed like a dream. Jack proposed to Beth on the anniversary of her arrival at the ranch, kneeling in the vegetable garden they'd planted together. The engagement ring was simple but perfect, with a small diamond that caught the morning sun like a promise. "Will you marry me, Beth Collins?" Jack asked, his voice shaking with emotion. "Will you be my wife and my partner and everything?" "Yes," Beth said through happy tears. "Yes, absolutely yes." Duchess, now pregnant with her first foal, watched from the nearby pasture as if she approved of the proceedings. The old Mare had become something of a ranch mascot. Beloved by all the workers and spoiled with treats by everyone who met her, they planned a simple wedding on the ranch, inviting only the people who mattered most to them. Tom Rodriguez would officiate. Tommy would be Jack's best man, and Beth's college roommate would fly in from California to be her maid of honor. The morning of the wedding, Beth stood in front of the mirror in her small apartment, adjusting her simple white dress. It wasn't fancy, but it was perfect for a ranch wedding. She thought about how far she'd come from the scared, homeless woman who'd arrived here 2 years ago. Jack waited for her at the altar they'd set up in the garden, surrounded by the vegetables they'd grown together and the friends who'd become their chosen family. When Beth appeared, walking toward him with Duchess following behind like a four-legged bridesmaid, Jack felt his eyes fill with tears. "Dearly beloved," Tom began, but Jack was only half listening. He was too busy looking at Beth, the woman who'd saved his life just as much as he'd saved hers. They exchanged vows they'd written themselves, promising to support each other's dreams, to face whatever challenges came their way together, and to never take for granted the love they'd found. When Tom pronounced them husband and wife, the small crowd erupted in cheers. Jack kissed his bride under the Montana sky, surrounded by the land they both loved and the community that had embraced them. Later, as they danced together at their reception, Beth looked around at the ranch that had become her home, the people who'd become her family, and the man who'd become her everything. "No regrets?" Jack asked, spinning her around the dance floor. "Only one," Beth replied with a mischievous smile. "What's that?" "I wish I'd found you sooner." Jack laughed and pulled her closer. "We found each other when we were ready. That's all. That matters." As the sun set over their ranch, their home, their future, Beth knew he was right. Sometimes the best things in life are worth waiting for.